Hello, and welcome to The Dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, I wanted to talk about my Endless Realms campaign that I ran recently, which, as I mentioned before, was actually kind of like a mesh of two different stories, or two different game systems. And so I figured in this one, we'll just talk about like kind of how the concept came together and what the overall idea for everything was and some of the more technical issues. Then I'll probably do another video or maybe two videos, depending on how long it's going to be, kind of covering the story. And I'll probably do a video about our Witcher campaign as well, because I kind of wanted to talk about some other tabletop role-playing games. I was going to do a Baldur's Gate video, but I had a bunch of technical issues, so I actually did that video last week, but I just wasn't able to do it because, technical issues suck. But then, I was like, do we really need another Baldur's Gate video? Like, do you need me to tell you that Warlock and Sorcerer are really good together? You probably already knew that. So, who cares? Let's just move on, and I figured, we'll do one of these. So, the Endless Realms / Lords of Gossamer and Shadow campaign came about because my players and I had played a game called Endless Realms, which is, I mentioned before, I did a video on it. It's like a small indie game, but it was really fun, and we liked the rule system, and, it was just something different and kind of cool, right? So my players wanted me to make a campaign for that. The problem is, I had recently discovered a game called Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, which I was actually like way more excited about. Because Lords of Gossamer and Shadow was based on the old like Amber Diceless role-playing game from like the 80s or 90s, whatever it was. But I really liked that game. And I thought it was really fun. And I really liked the Amber books by Zelazny. A big fan of them. Especially the original series with Corwin. But the Morrowind series is good too. So I kind of wanted to do something more along those lines. But my players didn't really seem too interested. And I didn't think it was really fair to make them like buy new books for a game that none of them really seemed that interested in playing. Meanwhile, people had already bought books for Endless Realms. But then I had the idea, I was like, the game was called Endless Realms. But they really only describe like one realm where the players start. And then there's like brief stuff on like other planes of existence and stuff like that, right? Meanwhile, I've got this other game called Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. And the whole concept of Lords of Gossamer and Shadow is that there's this dimension, and this dimension is just called the Grand Stair. And this staircase goes like up and down forever into infinity. And it's got all these branches and hallways that run off it. And along all these branches and hallways and everything else are just an infinite number of doors leading to basically an infinite number of worlds, right? And like some worlds will have like 20 or 50 or 1,000 doors that lead to it. Other worlds might not have any now. I'll explain that in a minute. But basically, you could just go anywhere you wanted. And at the heart of the stair, because there's no top or bottom, but there is a middle, is this thing called the Labyrinth. And the Labyrinth is really more a test of like willpower than it is like your ability to navigate it. You do navigate it, but as you navigate it, it kind of like imprints the pattern into like your brain. And so if you reach the heart of the Labyrinth, you gain the ability to see and open and close all these different doors, right? Because the idea is that like our world that we all live in might actually have like 1,000 doors leading to the Grand Stair. But unless you are like a warden of the stair, you can't actually see the doors and you can't actually open them. Somebody else might be able to open them for you. And every now and then you get these people with like rare magical or psychic abilities, and they might be able to see the door too, but they usually can't open it. Every now and then they can, though. That happens sometimes. But usually somebody else that can open a door will open it for you, and then you could go through it, right? It's kind of the basic idea how it works. So I knew that if I wanted to use that setting, which I really kind of wanted to, that it was going to be a different kind of campaign. It was going to be one that would involve a lot of like low fantasy worlds, high fantasy worlds in the middle, but also things like steampunk or cyberpunk. It could involve like Terminator 2 type worlds where it's just a bunch of machines that have basically destroyed the rest of humanity, and it's just some very brave freedom fighters trying to bring down Skynet, That actually would have been a great world. I should have done that, but I didn't think of it until just now. But basically, you could just do anything and everything. And there could be like 1,000 different versions of Earth, right? It doesn't really matter, right? And so I really had some interesting ideas for there. And Lords of Gossamer and Shadow itself had a book called like Gossamer Worlds, where they just go through and they give you 2 or 3 page descriptions of a bunch of worlds with some plot hook ideas. And they don't really give you much, but it was enough to get you started that if you liked a world, you could go with it, right? So that was the basic idea. I was going to take my players, but put them in this kind of like world jumping type of campaign. And there was going to be an overall arcing idea. Basically, the players were going to get to the Grand Stair. They were going to be witnesses to somebody's like dying breath from one of the other Gossamer Lords, right? And they'd go to help her. She would tell them there's a traitor somewhere in the Gossamer Lords, and then she'd die, right? And then the players would now be tasked by the leader of the Gossamer Lords to hunting down the traitor, because the players are new, and, you know, some of this has been going on for a while. She suspected that there's a traitor anyways, and of course this all predates the players, but since the players are brand new, she knows that they're not caught up in any political factions, and she feels like she can probably trust them because they're not going to be the traitor, right? And so the players would have to basically recreate the dead woman's name. Her name was Zarina. I'll just say that just so it's easier to keep people straight. So you're going to have to kind of like backtrack where Serena had been through, because obviously she got killed because she saw or heard something that the traitor doesn't want her to know, right? Otherwise, she'd probably still be alive. So they would have to like hunt for this traitor, and that would be like the culmination of the entire campaign, is when they finally like bring down the traitor, right? And reveal who they are. And we get the big giant fight scene at the end, of course, right? And I knew that this was going to involve a lot of world jumping, which is what I wanted. I wanted to basically take my players to a bunch of different worlds and just do a lot of weird, crazy things. So I mentioned in the last Endless Realms video where I first introduced the game itself and the rules and stuff. Like, one of the worlds we sent them to was basically Pacific Rim. It's these giant mechs in Japan versus giant kaiju, right? And I took this out of Gossamer Worlds, but they obviously took it from Pacific Rim, you know, so whatever. But yeah, we just went with that. It was kind of funny too, because I took all the names of all the Japanese people from like Japanese metal bands and Japanese volleyball players. That way I wouldn't have to like have notes on who everybody's names was. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's that's Miho or Asami or Miyako or whatever from Love Bites, or Ishikawa from the Japanese volleyball team. But then I could at least keep everybody's name straight, because, you know, I'd kind of have an idea of who they were. So that was kind of fun. But like, we just did a bunch of crazy worlds like this, and it really allowed me to like just experiment with a lot of weird ideas. I've done other things in the past where I've like combined different things, but I've never taken like the rules of one game and the setting of a completely different game and just say, we're going to ignore this setting and we're going to ignore these rules. So we're just going to put them together and try to make it work. But it actually was great. And I think that's the takeaway I got from all this, is that, you know, as long as it's fun, the players won't really care. A couple things I did have to worry about, though. I knew that the players are all coming from a fantasy world, but I knew that some of the worlds they go to, such as Giant Mech World, are not going to be fantasy worlds. And it's not really fair to take somebody who's a spellcaster and then not let them cast spells and not let them use magic. On the other hand, I had balance issues where I didn't want the players bringing back a 1,000-foot tall mech to the Grand Stair and then taking it with them to go fight dragons or something in some other world. So I came up with the idea where tech would be specific to each of the different realms on the other side of that door, right? So even if they looked the same, tech from one realm couldn't get brought to the stair and then taken somewhere else. It just wouldn't work, right? Meanwhile, the magic, though, permeates everything, because the Grand Stair is connected to everything and the stair is fueled by magic. So magic would always work. But I did want to do things like have, you know, like high-tech, low fantasy worlds. And because this game used like a mana point cost, right? So you'd have X number of mana points, spells would cost, you know, Y amount, right? I decided some worlds, magic would just be harder to cast, so I would increase the mana cost for those worlds. But in order to balance that and be fair to the players, I would also have really magically rich worlds where mana cost would be reduced, and maybe spells might even do more damage, right? I did that with one lightning world where lightning spells just did extra damage. And this allowed me to kind of, you know, customize things. And if the balance wasn't quite right, it didn't really matter, because we'd be there for 3 or 4 game sessions, maybe even 2, right? Who knows how long it would take. But a few game sessions, and we'd just move on. And I'd be like, okay, I think I increased the mana point cost too much. Double was probably a little overboard. Maybe the next time I send them to a low magic world, I make it 10% more or 15% more. And then the players actually feel like they're getting a deal too. They're like, oh, it's not as bad as the last world. The last world was double, Yeah, see, it's much better, much more reasonable. And then one of my players gave me the idea that you can even do that with physical characters too. Or maybe you go to like a low gravity world and your characters are like John Carter of Mars and you're jumping like 30 feet, straight in the air kind of thing. And, you're used to like heavier gravity. So now it's like you got superhuman strength pretty much, right? And, maybe you reduce the action point cost of doing everything, right? On the other hand, you could also send them to a high gravity world. And now maybe everything's a little harder to do. And it's, the spellcasters aren't really going to care because they're going to be casting spells anyways. So, if basically everything gets treated as if they have like 1 less strength or 2 less strength, they're like, oh, that kind of sucks. But for the physical guys, they're like, oh, crap. We're in the physical version of low magic. But like I said, if you do that for a whole campaign, that would be really annoying. But if you just do it as part of a series of them jumping from world to world to world, and it's just customizing each world and making it feel a little different, I think it worked really, really well. Especially when I was like, okay, we want to have the effect of things feeling different, but we don't want it to be like just destroying the game because it's so different, right? So, I kind of used small little adjustments here and there, but it worked really well, and it definitely gave each world different like feels and stuff. It wasn't just a cosmetic difference where, oh, now we're in this world or now we're in that world, right? Like the worlds actually felt different, they looked different, they played different, and I thought that was important. I also knew that since the players were going to be from a fantasy world, that things like spaceships and cars and even elevators were going to be a bit of an issue for them. So I needed to introduce like other people that could like help them in their journey. So I had these 2 NPCs mostly, one named Cal and one named Veronica. Cal used Order Magic and Veronica used Chaos Magic. And they ended up teaming up with the players a couple different times. Cal actually came from the Lords of Gossip and Shadow, but Veronica was my own invention. I basically combined like all the girls I used to know and hang out with when I went to clubs back in the day, and just put them all into one person. And she was awesome and terrible all at the same time, which of course, that just shows you who I was hanging out with. But she was amazing. All my players loved her too because she was just such an idiot half the time, but she was just such a fun character. She was great. But anyways, it was a really fun campaign because it had this like overarching story that the players were really engaged in, trying to hunt down the traitor. But it's like every world was like something new, and it was kind of like this chance to like explore and figure out what's happening, right? And it was really, really fun and neat. I also had a couple of recurring villains. There was some like weird inside jokes, like with like all the Koreans at the time in the campaign, because I've been watching a bunch of Korean television lately, and I decided to have like basically this one world to go to. It was this Korean CEO. His company had invented like realistic, like AI driven like sex robots. But not being content with just making a fortune from his sex robots, he decides that he wants to start like kidnapping all these politicians and CEOs of different companies and stuff and replacing them with robot duplicates that are all programmed to, basically function as normal, but to actually be loyal to him and obey him. But he gets caught and gets sent to prison, right? So the players meet, they show up in one of these worlds. We just call them the Space Koreans, and then later there's the Sky Koreans, but they're all connected. The Sky Koreans are just on one planet, and the Space Koreans are, in space, right? And that was pretty fun. They quite liked all the Koreans. It was pretty funny. Because I don't, I've never been to Korea. I don't really know anything about Korea really, except for what I've seen on K-dramas, which is probably not the most realistic and accurate depiction of Korea. But I just stole like all the names from like characters from Korean shows and Korean actresses and like pop stars and stuff. That way and I just have a list of like Korean, like, this person, who they were. So it actually ended up working out really well. And it became kind of a running joke too, because for most of these actresses and stuff, because they're all, very attractive, otherwise probably wouldn't be actresses, I just decided that half of them were actually like Korean sex robots, and that this guy had like literally patterned his robots after all these Korean celebrities from their world. Because their world was still like our world, it was just a different version of our world. So all these people existed in both, was my basic concept there, right? And then eventually the players ended up having to go to the prison where Chairman Kim had been put after he, got caught trying to abduct all these like wealthy and powerful people and replace them with robots. And they ended up having to break him out so he could help them on a mission. They later spaced him out of an airlock, of course, because he did betray them and try to get them all killed. Because he's the villain, of course he's going to. And they broke him out of prison. You think he wants to go back there? Of course not. He's free again. But yeah, it ended up being pretty fun. And overall, it was just a really, really good campaign. And we went to like a lot of different worlds. There's a lot of like fantasy races and stuff. I don't mean to make it sound like it was all humans or anything, or even Koreans specifically. That was just the one little scenario. But we did end up coming back to them again because we had to go break Chairman Kim out of prison. But yeah, overall, it was just a really, really fun campaign where I was able to do a lot of really weird, crazy ideas and just kind of combine a lot of like weird stuff. And overall, it ended up being really great. My players loved it. They still talk about maybe wanting to go back to it someday because I think we ended at level 12 or 13 was when the story concluded. But they wanted to go to 20, so they're like, you should come up with something else and keep going. And I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll think about it. But so far, nothing. But that's okay. But overall, it was just a really, really fun campaign. So like I said, I'll probably do another video or two where kind of go through the story because I know a lot of people really like my stories when I talk about the different campaign ideas. And even though this isn't Dungeons and Dragons, we're talking about a completely different game system. We're technically two different game systems, I guess. I think that if you've ever decided I want to do something like weird and crazy and maybe kind of take Dungeons and Dragons but change it up a little bit, you can steal stuff from other sources and just kind of incorporate it and try to make it work. That's what I did. And I will warn you, it does take more work. It does take more planning. The balance might not be perfect on your first try. But whatever. At the end of the day, as long as it's fun, your players probably aren't going to care, And I know my players, they really love this campaign. Every 3-4 game sessions, they were going to a different world with different rules and completely different scenarios. And a lot of them were like kind of crazy and over the top. And I'd stolen them from movies or TV shows or whatever else, right? But it was always something new and different, but yet all still connected. And the players really, really enjoyed the campaign. So, like I said, I'll probably do maybe a 2-part video going through like the actual storyline. This is more like the part 0. This is like the planning and everything else, and the concept and planning phase. That's what it is. But overall, it was a great campaign, and I liked it. My players liked it. So, giant success. Anyways, I think that's everything I have for this video. All I would tell you if you're a DM and you want to, maybe try something different is just give it a shot. You never know. At worst, it kind of sucks and you're just like, yeah, sorry guys, that didn't work the way I thought it would. And the players will be like, yeah, it sucked. But whatever, you'll live. But you might come up with something like really magical and interesting that players will be talking about for years from now, And like D&D's got a pretty proud tradition of doing this kind of stuff. We had things like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks back in the day where, it turns out that the dungeon is really a crashed alien spaceship with lasers and androids in it. But it was a fun adventure, even though it's just like the typical, kind of like fun house dungeon type thing. But it was cool. So, why not? But yeah, this gave us, 20 different expeditions to Barrier Peaks, because we just kept jumping from world to world, from one weird place to another. And it was awesome. So anyways, like I said, feel free to experiment. Feel free to have fun. Feel free to steal from other sources, right? Like, I mentioned the giant world with, like the Pacific Rim world with the kaiju versus the mechs, right? That actually came from the Gossamer Worlds Compendium, where they, Lords of Gossamer and Shadow made this book with just all these different Gossamer worlds, right? But obviously, they took that from Pacific Rim. And Pacific Rim is obviously inspired by things like, Japanese anime and Godzilla movies, So, like, almost nothing's ever fully original. I find it's usually just to embrace that. And instead of trying to pretend that it was your original idea, just be like, yeah, we're doing Pacific Rim, but tabletop, and your players are probably going to think it's awesome, Mine did, so whatever, right? So, anyways, that's everything I have. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I'd love to hear about your own stories, about like just weird creative ideas you tried, or things that maybe you did it and it was a cool idea but it didn't quite work the way you wanted, or whatever, right? But just, anytime you decide to just take the rules and just say like, you know what, I just want to do something kind of different. And that's kind of what this campaign was. And like I said, it was awesome. So my players loved it. I loved it. No complaints. Anyways, that's everything, and I will see you next time. Bye.